Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is 7 sketchy things about Pisces. This is the last video in a series about the different astrological signs and how they manifest in their shadow aspects. And this could be the Sun in Pisces, Pisces rising, Moon, Venus, Mars, and Mercury in Pisces. And they will show these negative traits. If you want to call it negative, I prefer the word shadow or challenging, because when we say good and bad, that is a little bit simplistic, I believe. But how these challenging aspects show themselves in different planets, different points of the person's makeup, astrological makeup. So number 1, dependent and passive. And some of these I've combined, and they may not be exactly the same terms, and sometimes they may seem redundant when I go down the list, because sometimes they're kind of connected. So that's just how it is when you're coming up with these kinds of lists. And Pisces is a sign that is very much influenced by the people around them. That's why it's so important for people with a prominent Pisces. Peter picked a pepper, I have all these P's, peck of pickles. But Pisces really needs to be very selective in their company, because they are a mutable water sign, and there is this incredible impressionable, and I don't know if there's a word, impressionability, but they're very impressionable. Water, there's a book about water that you can really structure water or program water based on things that you say to water. It's called The Secret Language of Water or something. I don't know. It's a very popular book, so you can check it out. But Pisces is a mutable water sign. Scorpio is a fixed water sign, so it's not going to work the same way with Scorpio. But because Pisces is also a mutable sign, it's very open to change. And so Pisces people tend to be very influenced by the people around them. And if they're raised by people who are really together, and they are very, they're not dysfunctional, then a Pisces person may resemble more of Virgo, which is the opposite sign. And actually, you do come across Pisces people who seem more like one of the other zodiac signs, like an Aries or something like that. And they really do tend to, I'm talking about the sun sign. They sometimes can actually mimic another sign. But some of them are very passive, and some of these other things that I've mentioned kind of go along with it, because number 2 is learned helplessness and martyrdom. That's the eternal victimhood. A lot of Pisces seem to grow up in families that are dysfunctional. And so because of this, let's say somebody has a parent who's an alcoholic, and they end up taking care of their parent from an early age. They end up having to take care of their siblings. They have to cook for them. They have to dress them. They have to make their parent coffee in the morning and revive them and call the boss, or whatever they have to do to keep their parent functioning. They can grow up being a caretaker from a young age, and they grow up thinking that life is unpredictable. There can be other dysfunctions that occur, but I'm giving an example. So because of this, Pisces can grow up very quickly having to be a caretaker, having to learn how to morph into whatever they need to be. And as a result, that feeling that once they get settled, something else comes down on them can create the sense that life is totally against them and totally unpredictable. And when you're a child, you don't have that same sense of power that you do as an adult, because you're a minor. So you can't tell your parent, I'm out of here, I'm going to get my own apartment. And what are you going to do? You're going to go to the police, or you're going to go to social services. Children don't have that capacity to know how to take care of themselves. And so they are stuck in this family that could be quite hellacious. Another biggie is some type of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and how is the child supposed to cope? They go into fantasy. Pisces is ruled by Neptune, so there's like going into that fantasy to protect themselves. And they also take away from a life, that life is against them because they're being treated like a punching bag, like someone to be sexually abused, like somebody to be put down emotionally. And it can get very severe. And so I totally understand why a person feels learned helplessness, because that is that has been their reality. They don't know how to be strong in that sense. And yet they are, because they're survivors. That makes them strong. And so if you're a Pisces listening to this and you resonate with feeling like a martyr, feeling like you're always the victim, the first thing to do is to not feel sorry for yourself. Don't give in to temptation. Even if you have a story that is a sob story, that is something that would wow people about how much you've endured. Because it is okay to be proud of the fact that you've survived, and to really understand that being a survivor means that you're still here and you have things to accomplish and God has a plan for you. So it's definitely something to be proud of, but you don't want to wallow in self-pity or try to garner it from other people, because that can also be a hidden motivation of telling people that you've endured all of this, and to define yourself by that. You know, some people define themselves from their victimhood. And while that can feel gratifying emotionally, because you feel that finally you've gotten sympathy for all the hell that you've been through, it can easily become a trap where you start to just see yourself always as a victim and always telling your story. And it can also be manipulative, where you try to get people to feel sorry for you, and then you get away with a lot of crap that you're doing, which I'm going to get to in a minute. So those were the first two: passivity, dependency, and learned helplessness. And they're kind of in the same ballpark. Number 3, deceptive. Okay. Now, again, I believe that a lot of this stems from a messed up childhood. When you grow up with addiction, for instance, I'm using that because that's a common theme, abuse too. You're dealing with somebody who is messed up in their head, right? So a lot of times those types of people do not accept the truth in life. They're running away from themselves. So if you, like a typical child, kind of call them out and say, you're an alcoholic, you're a molester, you are doing this evil thing to me, they cannot even handle it, because they are acting out their own problems and their own shame and their own anger. So you learn to lie in order to protect yourself. If you have a parent who is trying to keep you from doing good things because they are like so envious that you get to have certain experiences that they didn't get to have. I mean, it does get that bad. There are some people who don't want their children to get an education or to go and to have a nice life. They want their child to be as miserable as they are, so they try to make you sink down to their level. And so you may find yourself lying so that they don't know that you're going to school, so they don't know that you're actually doing well in school. And because if you told your mother or your father, but if you told your parent that you got an A on your test and they said, oh, how could you must have cheated. You're like so stupid. There's no way you could have gotten a good grade. You may lie in the future. You may not even say anything altogether, because they're trying to bring you down. They're trying to make you like you're nothing. And it's all because of their own crap that they haven't dealt with. And so this is what I'm getting at. And it's a protective mechanism to lie when you're young to save yourself from some sort of abuse or just some basic crap that you don't want to deal with. You don't want, maybe it's not severe abuse, but you don't want to hear the name calling and all these things. You just don't want to hear it anymore. So you just tell them what they want to hear. The problem is when you get older and you continue to do this in your life. And I notice that there are certain people, and it doesn't have to be the sun in Pisces. It can be Mars in Pisces is a big one because Mars is how we act. And they tend to be very indirect. Let's say we're talking about Mars in Pisces, and it's a form of, we're blurring lines here. It might not be deceptive, but it's not direct. It's like indirect. And some people engage in passive-aggressive behavior. They hint at the fact that they're mad rather than come out with it. And some people actually are deceptive where if they're unhappy in a marriage, they may cheat because they don't want to hurt the person's feelings or they don't want the person to get mad. And yet they don't understand that they're creating a whole new set of problems. So that's something that you have to contend with. And if you did grow up in a messed up environment, you might want to talk to somebody who can give you good advice. You might want to read books that help with that. There's so many different avenues to go with, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to act like it's okay to be this way. You want to change your ways. And because you're a mutable sign, Pisces, you are capable of changing your ways. It's just that you have to know that what you're doing is not the best. If you're dealing with somebody who is a pathological liar, who is deceptive with you in some way, understand that there's something else going on, and don't put them down for it. Just kind of, in a sensitive way, point out that you've noticed that they said a certain thing that wasn't true, and tell them that they don't have to worry that you're going to jump all over them if they tell you something that may be unpleasant, but that is true, that you are willing to listen to them and that you really value honesty. And because sometimes these are good people who just happen to be retaining a certain behavior, that trait that they had growing up, and that was actually there to protect them. And they weren't wrong to do that when they were growing up because they really had very little options at that point. Okay, 4, fatalistic, pessimistic. And again, this can connect to learned helplessness and things like that. Because of, if a Pisces person has grown up with a lot of chaos in their environment, it's easy to become pessimistic, and it's like waiting for the other shoe to drop syndrome. Something goes well in the Pisces person's life, and instead of being happy about it, they're kind of like nervous, That may be the time when they're the most nervous, is when good things are happening. And they may even become very negative at that time, and they may feel like they're being set up by the universe only to have a greater disappointment. And obviously, this is twisted thinking, but this is what happens when you have your heart broken many times in life. If I sound like I totally understand Pisces, there's a good reason for that. It's not because I have a personal planet in Pisces, but I do have Saturn in Pisces, and I have Chiron in Pisces. And so both of those can indicate, and I have a lot of, hard angles with both Saturn and Chiron. So I totally get it, and it's kind of amusing to me to think about because, it's easy to feel pessimism when you have a lot of disappointments. But once you get on the high-flying disc, that's a term that Abraham Hicks invented. Once you get in a positive vibe, and it's like a consistently positive vibe, you will find, Pisces, that you lose a lot of that starts to dissolve from your life. It's really wonderful. And the positive aspect of Neptune is actually being idealistic, but not in a delusional way, but in a very high vibe way. So it can be great. Number 5, addictive tendencies. And this is also a Neptune influence. The reason for this is because Pisces is ruled by Neptune, and Neptune is all about about fantasy, illusion. And by the way, Pisces, the 12th house, relates to the spiritual realm. And I think also a lot of people who are have addictive tendencies and who like to, especially with downers, Pisces and water and alcohol, but also, of course, think of Kurt Cobain, a double Pisces, sun and moon, and it was heroin. But the reason, and it can be, tranquilizers, Xanax, all that stuff. The reason is because drowning one's sorrows, okay? Pisces is a water sign, and water signs tend to feel emotions so intensely that numbing them out becomes what they tend to do when they do have addictive tendencies. The other reason, but addiction is not just about substance abuse. It can be anything, it can be pornography, where they're seeing an idealized version of something that is sexual, and that can become a problem. It can be very addictive. What else? Any kind of just escapism, watching television too much, being on the internet too much. Images, Neptune rules photography, and I realize now how much I love seeing images, and this can lead to watching excessive amounts of videos, being immersed in the boob tube and things like that. And you have to realize that you're trying to escape something else and have balance in your life in order to really acknowledge that, because a lot of people wouldn't even think that the internet is truly an addiction, or that sex can be truly an addiction in any form, whether it's pornography or actual physical contact. And of course it can. Anything that's compulsive behavior is an addiction. And food can be another addiction. If you sit with it, you will realize that a lot of times you're trying to comfort yourself. And again, it doesn't make somebody a bad person. When I'm talking about our country, I'm talking about America specifically. When I say our country, my country is so shame-based about addiction, because it's such a type A type of a country where it's like, you have to succeed, you have to produce, and all these things. And yet addiction is about oblivion, really. And yet if you do something healthy that is connected to Pisces 12th house, it would be meditating into oblivion. You know what I mean? Although there is religious addiction too, where a person uses some practice like meditation or going to church, belonging to a church in an addictive way, where they just get obsessed with it. Everything becomes about that, or a cult or something like that. And they take it to the extreme because they're escaping other things in their life. And so that's what we have to look at, the escapism, not saying the person is weak and they just can't get a handle on their problem. Most people have a weakness in their life in some area. And so instead of being ashamed of it, we should be trying to help others and help each other to do better in whatever our weakness is. Number 6, confused, indecisive. Again, going into those other things. A lot of it, mutable water sign. End of story. Pisces, I'm going to say number 7 because it's very similar. Chameleon, no core self. About number 7, if somebody grows up in an environment that is very chaotic, sometimes they have to move a lot. So they have to blend into a new family, a new caretaker, maybe moving with their family to a new location. And they always have to kind of become a new person to fit into that new environment. So they develop that chameleon tendency. But just even within the family of origin, if there's always like some new crisis happening, they have to kind of put on a mask and deal with it. And so that's where that comes from. But Pisces is a very creative type of a person. So they may want to try on a new persona, and it might just be for their own sake. They don't necessarily want to identify with anything. Neptune is nebulous. It's very indistinct. So it might just be coming from a good place, but it can cause other people not to really know who they are and feel like they're kind of sketchy, when it comes down to it. And so that's the confusion, which was number 6, can be really annoying when a Pisces person falls in love with 2 people, which is possible because they can see the good in other people, and then here they are totally falling for 2 different people and not knowing, what they should decide. And that's a kind of like a weakness, you could call it, within them, where when you don't know yourself, it's hard to make good decisions sometimes, because if you really know yourself, you're going to know who's good for you and who's not good for you, even if they're good people. You may have 2 choices, and and both may be good people, but maybe neither one is good for you, So, I hope you enjoyed this. I always have fun making these kinds of videos, and you're the last sign, Pisces. So anyway, if you like this type of analysis, this is what I do in my natal chart interpretations, and not just looking at the negative traits, obviously, but looking at patterns, looking at talents and things of that nature. The link to my website is below, and take care, you guys. Bye.